Hello everyone, I'm Jack Fisher and welcome to my world. Embrace yourself because I'm going to talk about the DC Cinematic Universe, aka the DCEU. I know that's been a hot topic among comic book fans and movie buffs lately. I'm also well aware of the ongoing upheavals at Warner Brothers. To date, I've avoided making videos about it because it's still hard to make sense of it all. It's even harder to make educated predictions about what to expect moving forward. While I may be a Marvel fan, I still have a strong affinity for DC Comics and its iconic characters. And I generally do want them to succeed in making better superhero movies. I think it's good for the comics industry, I think it's good for the movie entertainment industry, I think it's good for society as a whole, seeing these beloved, iconic heroes in great movies. Now, I don't want to dwell too much on how Warner Brothers mishandled the DCEU, going all the way back to Superman Man of Steel. That's a depressing, frustrating story that is now officially behind us. With the hiring of James Gunn and Peter Safran, the DCEU has a new direction and a new vision. While it hasn't yet been confirmed whether they'll do a hard reboot or some crisis-style event with The Flash, we can safely assume that we're in for a different kind of cinematic universe. While many of us may mourn not seeing Henry Cavill as Superman or Gal Gadot as Wonder Woman anymore, I still feel this needed to happen. The DCEU in its previous iteration just wasn't working. Sure, it had a few hits here and there, but it just wasn't sustainable. And to truly realize the potential of these iconic characters, DC and Warner Brothers needed a new plan. And I'm genuinely excited to see what that plan entails. But since it'll be a while before we know any details, I'd like to share a few insights on how I feel the new DCEU can succeed, as well as some potential pitfalls that might hold it back. Whenever you see a Marvel movie, it's akin to buying your favorite brand of cereal or candy. You know it, you like it, and even when it's not perfect, you still enjoy it because you've come to appreciate the taste. The DC movies tried early on to set a very different tone compared to Marvel. And for a while, it seemed to work. Zack Snyder's style for Man of Steel was quite different. It had its strengths and its weaknesses, but there's no denying that it was distinct. And I believe it totally could have worked in the long run had future movies maintained the same consistency. But they didn't. In fact, the only consistent tone for the DC movies was inconsistency. Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice had a distinctly darker tone, drawing inspiration from Frank Miller's The Dark Knight Returns. But the tone of Aquaman was completely different, offering something lighter and more colorful, literally and figuratively. Even though these movies technically occur in the same cinematic universe, they just felt totally incongruent with one another. Marvel movies may vary considerably. Iron Man and Guardians of the Galaxy are very different in terms of style, but they still have a similar underlying tone. And you can feel it from movie to movie. That consistency is not easy to create, let alone sustain. But it's absolutely vital for a cohesive cinematic universe. It doesn't mean that every movie has to tell the same jokes or have the same kind of dialogue. It just needs to feel like part of a trusted brand. So that when you go to see a DC movie, you can expect a certain level of quality, and that quality is good. All it really takes is one great movie to set the bar, and from there, you can build on something so much greater. Talk to anyone who has followed comic books for any length of time. They can attest how hard it is keeping up with all the ongoings and various events in both Marvel and DC. There are just so many characters and stories to follow. It's easy to get lost and overwhelmed, so much so that it's too troublesome to keep up at times. The same can happen with movies. Marvel has grown so much over the course of the past decade that keeping up can be difficult. But it's still not that great a burden. Even with so many characters running around, you can still generally follow what goes on from movie to movie. It may have started with Iron Man, but it didn't entirely rely on him. Now with the DCEU, it's tempting to rely on its most iconic characters, namely Batman, Superman, and Wonder Woman. And it was entirely understandable that Warner Brothers got things started with Superman, Man of Steel. And I certainly wouldn't be surprised if the new DCEU started with Superman again. He's just that great an icon. But, as important as Superman is to DC Comics, he can't be the only character they rely on. He can be important like Iron Man, but everything can't begin and end with him. The same goes for Batman, another character DC tends to rely a lot on, especially with movies. For quite a while, Warner Brothers tried way too hard to recreate the success of The Dark Knight. But in doing so, it felt like the studio had tunnel vision, which really kept them from branching out. Now, that's not to say DC's famous Trinity shouldn't have a prominent role. They totally should. But Superman, Wonder Woman, and Batman cannot and should not be expected to carry the full load of a cinematic universe. At the same time, Warner Brothers shouldn't throw too many characters into the mix all at once. That's part of what made movies like Black Adam such a mess. Because at the end of the day, it's a balancing act. You can't rely too much on certain franchises, and you can't stretch the cinematic universe too thin. There's an overarching process to it all, and you can't skip too many steps. Not without tripping over yourself and derailing the entire effort. Again, just see Black Adam. Whenever someone talks about world building, they often use it as a criticism on poor writing. And while subpar world building often goes hand in hand with poor writing, the two are not the same thing. And for the DCEU, world building, or a lack thereof, was a frequent shortcoming. Just go back and watch the first round of DCEU movies. Try and figure out what kind of world building they attempted to do. Because unless you squinted really hard, you probably didn't see much. With the exception of Zack Snyder's Justice League, or the first Aquaman movie, few movies made much of an effort. There was never a sense that the world these characters inhabited had any real development or nuance. And that's a problem, because it makes every plot point feel somewhat contrived. It's like the world around these characters bend to accommodate whatever they do or need to do. These characters don't react as much as they warp everything around them to meet the demands of the plot. That is poor writing, and it will derail any cinematic universe. Before Superman dons his cape, before Batman dons his cowl, and before Wonder Woman picks up her magic lasso, it must first be established why these heroes are needed. It must be made clear that this is something ordinary people cannot handle, and this is a world that is in need of dramatic change by dramatic individuals. DC has proven before that they can do this. Even outside the comics, the Bruce Timm animated shows, especially Justice League, created the necessary situations before these heroes entered the picture. When the story started, it wasn't yet clear why this world needed a Justice League. But by the end, it was painfully apparent. The world of DC Comics is distinct in so many ways. It always has been. That's part of why it's so iconic. Any new cinematic universe needs to establish and build on those distinctions. From Metropolis to Gotham City, to Coast City, to Kahndaq, this world needs to be a character unto itself. And that character is every bit as important as any of the heroes who interact within it, if not more so. Because if it's not clear why the world needs heroes, then why tell their story in the first place? Superman is a big blue Boy Scout. Batman is a dark, brooding detective who fights criminals. Wonder Woman is a fierce and compassionate warrior. These are all critical, core aspects to these iconic characters. They strike to the heart of why they're so iconic in the first place. There's really no need to deconstruct or reinvent them. And yet, that's what DCEU kept trying to do. There's a reason why Richard Donner's Superman is considered the gold standard for all superhero movies, that movie did not try to reinvent Superman in the slightest. It perfectly maintained the core aspect of this character right down to his goody two-shoes demeanor. It worked so beautifully and still does to this day. But even in Man of Steel, there seemed to be this constant effort to make Superman edgier. The same thing happened to Wonder Woman, especially in Wonder Woman 1984. So many DC movies were built around the idea of getting these characters to do things that didn't mesh with their core persona, and then having them deal with the ramifications. Sure, there's a time and a place to add complexity and nuance to their story. But at the end of the day, you don't want to undermine the core of the character. Again, just see Bruce Timm's animated Justice League universe. Superman, Batman, and plenty of other characters were constantly pushed across certain lines. They even came close a few times. But they didn't. That too had consequences, but it made the characters better in the long run. And it reminded us, the audience, why these characters matter so much. Now, I get the temptation to update certain characters for modern sensibilities. I don't deny that there are some aspects of these characters that just wouldn't work today. But updating these characters for the current year doesn't mean reinventing them, deconstructing them, or anything of the sort. They can still be themselves. That doesn't have to change. But the world around them can still be very different. And how that world reacts to someone as good as Superman or as compassionate as Wonder Woman, that's a story worth telling. And that's a message worth conveying. Behind every great hero is a great villain. That villain need not be pure evil or the complete antithesis of the hero. They just need to act as an antagonist, a strong counter to the ideals and principles that the hero embodies. Superman is truth, justice, and a better tomorrow personified. By contrast, Lex Luthor is lies, injustice, and narcissism to the utmost. These two characters, just by being who they are, will inevitably clash, willingly or unwillingly. That's what makes them work so well. What the DCU attempted, well, that did not work. That's the nicest way I can put it. Now, I could go on a hell of a rant on just how poorly the DCEU handled Lex Luthor, General Zod, Black Mask, or Enchantress. But I won't. I have no desire to grit my teeth that much. All I'll say is that these villains had little to no depth. Even if they had understandable motivations, they either had no personality or that personality did not mesh with said motivations. As a result, the movies and the heroes within the movies suffered. Any new iteration of the DCEU needs better villains. And those villains need to have both compelling personalities and understandable motivations. They don't need to be complicated. The Joker is a great villain, but his only motivation is to just cause deadly chaos. Darkseid is evil incarnate, but even he has a distinct personality, as well as a larger vision that he seeks out and pursues. The heroes are just in his way. These are all important dynamics. The villains can't just be there to give the hero someone to fight. There has to be a reason behind it, as well as an ideology behind those reasons. Lex Luthor can't just oppose Superman because he hates or inconveniences him. There has to be more to it. The comics have fleshed that out over the years. And animated movies like All-Star Superman add even greater nuance, giving form and substance as to why Lex Luthor hates Superman so much, and not just how he goes about acting on that hate. Again, there's room for variation and range, but a good general rule is that if a villain can be replaced by an evil punching bag without changing the plot, then they need more refinement. In the effort to build a new DC cinematic universe, I get the temptation to just mirror what Marvel Studios has done. But at the same time, it's worth acknowledging that even Marvel Studios has its share of shortcomings. And DC and Warner Brothers would be wise to succeed where Marvel may have fallen short. Because if Marvel Studios does have a recurring shortcoming, it tends to involve how poor writing creates minor issues. Even though they may be small, they do add up over time. And they can't undermine the movie, the overarching stories, and the movie-going experience as a whole. The former DCEU had far greater shortcomings in that regard. Watching the theatrical version of Dawn of Justice, or the second act of Wonder Woman 1984, or most of Black Adam, it was frustratingly common to see some major plot holes. But what made it so much worse is that some of those holes were addressed in deleted scenes. Seriously, watch the ultimate cut of Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice. The few extra scenes in that movie add some critical details to the story. It also made me question how Warner Bros. Actually went about editing these movies. You just don't leave important parts of a story on the cutting room floor. That should go without saying. Good writing isn't the only ingredient to making a good cinematic universe, but it is important. More so now than it was a decade ago. Marvel Studios has set a very high bar, and both DC and Warner Bros. Should strive to exceed it. That means employing quality writing with each story, the kind that minimizes plot holes and maintains the overall cohesiveness of the narrative. Too many DCEU movies felt like a complete mess when edited for theaters. And even some Marvel movies have gotten messy because there's just too much emphasis on keeping the movie under 2.5 hours. But if Zack Snyder's Justice League and James Cameron's Avatar movies have taught us anything, it's that fans will sit through a 3-hour movie if it's well written, compelling, and above all else, entertaining. Comic books are meant to be fun and entertaining. Movies in general are meant to be fun and entertaining. Sure, there are times when something more serious and hard-hitting is warranted. But even that can't obscure what makes these things so enjoyable in the first place. And that sense of fun and enchantment just felt absent from many of the DCEU movies. It wasn't that they were overly serious or completely lacking in fun. I just got the impression that those making those movies forgot why fans love these characters and stories so much in the first place. Say what you will about Kevin Feige and Marvel Studios. They clearly love Marvel and they love these characters. That love does show in every movie and TV show. Even when things get dark and serious, there's still plenty of fun and entertainment to enjoy. I get that Warner Brothers' primary goal is making money selling merchandise and gaining market share. But to achieve all those goals, the product itself has to be appealing. It has to entertain and enchant audiences. And make no mistake, that audience is still there, despite the DCEU's shortcomings. Fans still love the comics, and fans still love the DC animated shows and features, going all the way back to Batman the Animated Series. The tone and style might be different from franchise to franchise, but the fun and entertainment factor is still what makes them work so well. Watching a movie like Black Adam, Suicide Squad, or Dawn of Justice honestly felt like a chore at times. They tried so hard to put together a completed movie that someone forgot to make it fun or even coherent at times. It also didn't help that the DCEU lacked a serious vision. Outside of Zack Snyder's vision, none of the DCEU movies seemed to be building towards anything. There was no larger event building, no larger story unfolding behind the scenes. Even when one movie connected with another, they really affected one another in any meaningful sense. And that's just not a winning formula if you want to create a coherent cinematic universe. Those connections need to be there. The fun and entertainment value needs to be there too. Combine them both, and you'll have something that will find a loyal audience for years to come. There's a lot more I could say about the future of the DC cinematic universe. I could say just as much about the past, from the missteps that have been made to the successes that have been achieved. That is a topic that could easily cover multiple videos while exploring every angle. But at the end of the day, we just don't know what to expect. and we may never know the full story about how the DCEU ended up as it did. Now, as of the making of this video, James Gunn and Peter Safran have the keys to the car that is the DC Cinematic Universe. We don't know their plans or the direction they're heading, and it's very likely that those plans have not been finalized. It'll likely be years before we have something tangible to get excited about. And while I can't speak for all fans, I will say that I am willing to be patient. And I'm willing to give DC and Warner Brothers a chance at making this new cinematic universe work. I may still be a Marvel fan at heart, but I'll definitely be rooting for DC. I want them to succeed. I want them to match and exceed what Marvel has done. The world of superhero media is constantly evolving. Regardless of how you feel about their place in the pop culture zeitgeist, there's no doubt that they have a unique appeal. That appeal is why characters like Superman, Wonder Woman, and Batman have been popular for so long. They embody certain ideals that transcend time, politics, and trends. And DC Comics, more so than Marvel even, has always embraced the breadth of those ideals. I strongly believe that the world needs those ideals more than ever. We need movies that show Superman's unparalleled humanity, kindness, and altruism. We need movies that show Batman pursuing justice in an inherently unjust world. We need movies that show Hal Jordan's courage, Wonder Woman's honor, Black Canary's determination, and Barry Allen's heart. These characters and stories are the antithesis of the cynicism, fatalism, and nihilism that tend to pervade during uncertain times. They are the shining beacons of hope that we can all use as guidance when times are tough. Turning all of that into a successful, vibrant cinematic universe will not be easy. And this video just covers a few ways in which it can succeed. But the odds of failure will always be greater. Even if it seems impossible at times, and even if it seems like it's too late, a bold new DC universe is still worth striving for. Of that I am certain. Thanks for watching, everyone, and thanks for joining me in my world. Please remember to like, comment, and subscribe, and until next time, take care and stay safe.